All right, so thank you everyone for coming tonight. Um, I'm going to introduce very briefly Byron Shelton, who is the Senior Program Director of the Saver Institute. And as I was reading your biography or your bio, Byron, um, you, you have done a lot of different things. And I'm just going to say you have many years of experience implementing holistic management practices across the earth. And I hope that we get to hear some stories tonight about some of those experiences because it seems like you have amazing experience with many different kinds of animals and many different environments on many different continents. So with that, I would just love to hand it off to you tonight and say thank you so much for being our guest and telling your story about your path to regeneration and about some of your experience.
Well, you bet. Happy to do that. Hopefully, all those experiences were because I couldn't hold a job and kept having. Hopefully, they one built on the other. But yes, I have had a privilege of doing a lot of different things. You never know what your path's going to take you. I'm sorry Jesse can't be here. Jesse's a good guy. You would have learned quite a bit from him. He went through training with us in New Hampshire a long time ago. I know he's based in Vermont, and the best to Jesse if you listen to this and your dad. Happy to tell you a little bit about my background, but then I'll tell you a little bit about holistic management. And then really, I would like this to be more of just an open discussion for most of the time, if that's all right with you guys. So,
That's great.
yeah, I'll just start with that. I was able to work on relatives' ranches. My parents didn't ranch in eastern Colorado growing up from the time I was 12 till through college. And that gave me experience in what they were doing was normal cow calf herds, hogs, wheat, corn, feedlot, kind of smaller feedlot, but just a smattering of things. I then went kind of had two career paths for a while. One was in outdoor education, really got into that with my wife, running guest ranches and high adventure youth camps. And at the same time, I found holistic management when I was teaching vocational agriculture in high school. And so I always had a nice time on the people come back from a rafting trip or whatever, and we'd take them out on the land, or they come back from their horseback riding. We'd take them out on the land and just learn to read the land and see what's going on with the ecosystem. And that was always just kind of eye-opening for people, and I found they were really interested. Uh, Managed ranches in western Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia, cattle and sheep, and across a variety of places. Um, in each case, trying to say, okay, what's working? Just looking at my own through my own eyes and saying, well, I enjoy all this, but what's working and what's not? What is still degenerating the land, even though it's providing an income maybe for a while, and what's truly regenerating the land? And when I ran into Alan Saver's work with holistic management, as with many people, what caught me first was the grazing end of it, but that's not what it is. Holistic management does not equal land grazing. It's so much more than that. It helps you understand that one tool and how to use it, but it's truly a decision-making process of how do you manage complexity. I'll get back to that more in a minute here. My wife and I then started raising our own grass-fed beef instead of managing for others. We said, let's lease our own land and raise our own beef, and that way we can sell it as beyond organic land improving, because it wasn't just clean beef that met the organic standards, because organic standards does not mean the land is regenerating. Now, I'm not saying those aren't good standards to have, but what did we have? 20 or 22 civilizations we know of that have gone under in the history of man that we know of. They were all organic. They just weren't managing their soil and their watershed and their land to where they stopped producing and they had to move on. So they were degenerating soils. And so we were really looking for how do we raise animals that improve the land, which is almost easier to do. The harder thing is how do we raise the food we need that we're currently doing through monocultures in a regenerative way? Because if you think about it, when you're grazing a pasture, whether it's wildlife or livestock, but you're grazing it with ruminants, you have polycultures, perennial polycultures, and the ground covered year round. That's what nature wants. So that's not fighting nature. But when you go to the other end of agriculture, where you bare the land every year, plant one crop of wheat or corn or soybeans, that's fighting nature a whole lot more. So that's actually the harder nut to crack. The ranching end of it fits with nature well if it's done right. If it's not done right, it degrades the land, as it is around the world in most places still. So it all comes down to the management. I became accredited with Savory Institute as a trainer so that I could then work with people. And that, when you're training something, that's when you learn the most anyway. So figure, well, if I can go train others in their situations, I'll sure speed up my learning. So I did that for quite a while. And then about 10 years ago, I actually did go to work full time for Savory Institute. So my role right now is training of trainers to scale around the world. One of the things we're trying to do is have, instead of somebody like you or me go into an area and do some training and then leave, and then they're kind of stuck unless they do some self-motivated management club of some kind. We changed our model to where we let people approach us and they say, we would like to become a regional hub. And then we say, great, we'll come to your place and set you up. And then you've got local people doing that in their spot. Hi, Tricia, by the way, we had somebody new join there. Welcome. Our local hubs can be either for-profit or nonprofit or a cooperative. They have their own business models, they have their own emphasis, their own names, but they're accredited as part of the Savory network. And so you have hub leaders who run the hub, and you have hub accredited professionals who do training in holistic management, either commercially or on a communal end with communities where the land is not owned by individuals, it's owned by the community. And with we also do training in, we call it EOV, ecological outcome verification. It's you might have heard of this, where we look at the land and say, we're not measuring the practices you're doing on the land, like the list of practices you would do to be organic or grass-fed or animal welfare. What we're doing is looking at the land and saying, is the land regenerating? And we don't check the practices. We know some will do it and some won't, but we're looking at the outcomes. So that's kind of what Savory is doing. We have about 65 hubs around the world right now. That's how we were trying to scale to have more impact quicker. The thing that really caught me with holistic management is there were some things about the environment I wasn't taught in college. I wasn't taught in any of my ag classes. And there was three key missing things in holistic management. One was the role of the ruminant on the land. You know, if you, and right now I manage one of the West Savory Institute has two ranches that we own and manage. One is in Colorado here. It's about 8,000 acres, and we run buffalo on it. So I manage that. And we have one in Zimbabwe, where Alan Savory's from, which is owned by about 7 tribes and chiefs and Savory Institute there, and about the same size. And they do the same thing in running enough livestock to help improve the land for the wildlife, because there's not enough wildlife there. And whether it's a wild animal or livestock, it's that stomach, that ruminant, that I can explain in a minute. But did you have a question there? Because I'm happy to take him as we go. Okay. Yeah, there were some environmental missing things, and then there was this idea of that wasn't enough. And I can review what those environmental things are if we want to in a few minutes, but that's what caught me. And then even with that knowledge, it wasn't enough until we started having a different decision-making process that really looked at the whole picture. And when that came in, then there started to be more continual success with land managers around the world. Because if you think about it, we're managing three things. It's humans, and it's the economics that goes with that, and it's the environment, nature. And those are all soft sciences. They're not hard sciences like chemistry or math, where, you come to a decision point and you do A or B and you'll have a definite answer. When we're managing these soft sciences, people and economics and nature, no matter what we decide, it's going to continue to go on and have unintended consequences and move around us. And we have to have more of that's where this word holistic comes from, the big picture view as we make choices. And we can do a lot of research that's very reductionist and scientific method, but we can't manage that way. We have to take that knowledge and then manage complexity. So that's what's kind of caught me, and my interest in has kept me in holistic management, involved with it as a way to regenerate. So let me stop with that. That's just some background, a little explanation on holistic management, and happy to answer some questions, or I can tell you a little bit more about like those environmental keys that we're missing, or then also I've got the two questions, Kyle, you forwarded to me from one of you there. So, but let me just take a break here for a minute. Thoughts or comments or questions?
I mean, I'm curious about the other two environmental or conditions you weren't taught in school, but
So
The ruminant and the other two.
yeah, the ruminant and the other two. Usually, what do we have? We have our creativity and our money and our labor that we throw at managing, but what do we truly have? What tools do we use on the land to improve nature? And for thousands of years, all we really had was fire or technology. And technology can be thousands of forms, everything from GMOs to irrigation to electric fencing to everything. And if we didn't use those two things, we would leave land alone. That's really the tool of rest, in a sense. We leave it alone and let it do what it'll do. The tool of rest is almost like a modern definition of the word conservation. Conservation today typically means we'll just set it aside and leave it alone. So that's a choice you have. So, technology, fire, and rest were the three tools. The one that we've missed and added there is replicating what the wild animal and its predator did on the land. So now this ties to those three missing keys. These three key insights are really tied to that tool and the others. So the ruminant, when things grow, we want them to decay. You can always hear a farmer saying, well, I wish it would rain more. I can't wait so things will grow. But we forget the fact that we need moisture for decay. When a plant grows and it won't decay, I didn't bring up any photos or hear anything on short notice, but when you're out hiking the next time, look at the ground. Things that are growing are green, obviously. And once they've dried off, there'll be some color of brown or tan. But if you're looking down as you're walking along and you see material that's still standing up, canopy or maybe plant litter laying on the ground, that's grayish, it's actually oxidizing or rusting into the air. The land is telling you in this area, we don't have regular enough moisture through the year and from year to year to have biological decay, take that plant material back into the ground. It's actually sitting there and oxidizing or rusting into the air. And that usually means it's 2 years old on up to a decade old. So parts of the world have regular moisture, and it has to do more with regularity than with amount. You can have high or low rainfall, but the real key is how regular is it? Because when you have regular moisture, let's take Eastern United States or Western Europe, you have a lot of regular moisture. What grows will decay, and it'll be gone within a year or two. That regular moisture allows all the microbes in the ground and that would climb up the plants and the dung beetles, all that life is in the soil and it'll suck it in. When you have the other 2/3 of the world where you don't have regular moisture, all that life either dies or goes dormant so often that it can't decay before it rusts up to the air. So here's a question for you. Where above ground in an area that has irregular rainfall, very seasonal rainfall, where do you always have moisture for decay to occur?
In the stomach of the animal?
Exactly. In the ruminant of the ruminant. It's not the chicken, it's not the pig, it's not the single-stomached animals. It's in the elk and the deer and the bighorn sheep and the cattle and the goats. Their purpose, they're walking around like mobile fermentation vats. They've got a moisture vat year round. And so that's how things grow and decay. And they either go through the animal as manure or the plants get trampled or rubbed on or stampeded over by the hoof action. So when you take the ruminant away, you broke the system. And if you want to use the tool of rest, remember we have technology and fire, and rest is do nothing. If you're in an area that has irregular moisture and you take the large animals away, which is really the fourth tool, you just broke it. So that's where the ruminant of the animal comes in. The other concept there is, well, what kept them bunched and moving so that they didn't continually overgraze growing plants? Well, that was the predator. So when you take the predator away, you broke the system again. So we're trying to replicate the predator, and our livestock are replicating the wildlife because we don't have enough wildlife left, even in Africa. Our Kenya hub is using lots of cattle to help freshen up and improve the land to get more wildlife there, because they still don't have the wildlife that it used to have to keep that land fresh in that irregular rainfall area. So anyway, that's one key insight there.
Byron, I found a picture of oxidation. I texted it to Kyle. I don't know, Kyle, if you would be able to share it somehow, but the Carrizo Plain, which is down near San Luis Obispo, used to have a lot of antelope. It's down in the central, sort of south of the Central Valley, and they're not there very often anymore. I think there are very few of them. And you can see the lack of, it's a national monument, so there are no grazers there now. And you can see the oxidation. And I went in one of those super bloom years where you see like the wildflowers that have gotten a lot of rain, and so they have a super bloom. But you can also see the standing matter from the year before that's like 4 feet tall that was not grazed, even though there was a ton of rain. So we can continue, but maybe, oh, so Kyle has it. You could see a picture of, there you go.
Yeah, and that's real tall annuals that are oxidizing. Yeah, and then down below, as you look at the land surface, you learn to just tune your eye to it as you walk along. But that's a simple thing that's telling you basically, is the ecosystem process of the mineral cycle working? Is our plants growing and decaying? And if you've got gray there, it's a very limited amount. Good, thanks for that photo there.
Sure.
So one environmental key, I gave you a long explanation, is the role of the ruminant. And the second is the role of the predator. Welcome, Isaiah, by the way, if you've joined. So you got those two things. And then the other thing that was really discovered in France in the 1950s by Andre Voisin, he was working in these areas that have regular rainfall, we call non-brittle, and these seasonal areas we call brittle. He was working in that non-brittle France with dairy cattle, but he studied that when grass grows and you take a bite out of it, once it starts to regrow, which can be within 3 or 4 days, then it starts sacrificing roots. That's what overgrazing is, that it's timing, nothing to do with the numbers of the animals. One animal can overgraze a pasture all summer long, 10,000 animals going through there today, and they're gone before it starts to regrow, won't overgraze plants. They might eat too much, or they might overtrample, but really defined what overgrazing was, and it's timing. So those three things, let's back out of this again. Those three things helped realize, along with the holism, this better decision making. This is what holistic management's bringing to the table. That other concept I covered with you about seasonal rainfall. If you use a fire, any tool you use, fire or kind of technology or rest or living organisms, managing of the animal impact and grazing. If you do that in an area that's got regular rainfall, and then you do the same thing in an area with irregular, you get a different result. You know, if you burn a fire in Virginia and you go away and use the tool of rest, it will not stay bare ground. It won't desertify. It will cover over. Now, it may not go up to the succession level you want without other management, but it won't desertify. It won't lose biodiversity, and it won't just erode. If you do that here in Colorado or in Utah, you burn land and then you use the tool of rest, do nothing to it, it'll stay bare ground. It will desertify. And so realizing we can't have such things as best management practices, we're missing that understanding of regularity of moisture. So that's some of the key environmental side, a quick overview that caught my eye and made sense to me, along with that decision-making piece. to say, hey, there's something going on here. And through the years, I've seen people improving land and regenerating land as opposed to not and thinking they are. So that was kind of to your question, Kyle, the other three insights there.
Thank you.
Donalise, you had a question too.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think in listening to what you just said, this might not have the easy answer that I was hoping it would because it's so regionally specific. But I was wondering and I love that as you look at the EOV, the ecological outcome value, that you're looking at outcome and not practice. And one thing I'm really interested in is looking at what metrics really want to be tracked. So I wondered if you had a list, if we wanted to be specific about California or the West Coast, of what you consider important, if not imperative metrics for people to be tracking now. And I want to be so audacious so that maybe they could get built into the Farm Bill and have values assigned to them and be catalysts for change.
Yeah, you bet. Alan really focused on saying, okay, the ecosystem, when we look at the land, the ecosystem, we can look at it through, it's like it's one room, it's one thing, but we could look at it through 4 different windows. In other words, 4 different ways and just say, well, which way is really standing out to us the most? But they're all interrelated. In fact, you're looking at one thing, but we call it the 4 ecosystem processes. And so and you can go on our website and look up EOV, and a lot of this information is on there, including the protocols. One way you can look at the lands through the water cycle. One of the first things we do is say, what are the where do you find the leading indicators, the first indicators to say change is happening in the right direction? And it's the soil surface. Lagging indicators are carbon sequestration, or are there more red-tailed hawks, or is there greater diversity of plants? The early indicators before that, to tell the land manager, he's focusing on the soil surface. So he'll be looking at the water cycle and be saying, is it effective or not? Just because it rains doesn't mean you used it. And we get 12 inches of rain out here at West Bijou. That's the Savory Institute branch in eastern Colorado in a typical summer. But we probably still only use 6 or 7. Our ground is not ready to be a sponge to absorb it all. So effective moisture. So we look at, is the soil surface capped? Are there little gullies forming? Is it pushing litter dams before it ever moves soil? Things like that. We look through the mineral cycle window, and that is, our plants growing and decaying? Do we have oxidation that we were talking about earlier? We look at it through a window we call we call it community dynamics, but what plant and animal communities are there, and are they changing? Do you have all ages of plants? Do you have trees and shrubs and forbs and legumes and grasses? Are you missing some? We look at it through capture of sunlight, energy flow. Do you have bare ground? Do you have canopy? Do you have litter? Do you have litter that's decomposing? But see, they're all related. That relates to mineral cycle. But it's just 4 ways to look at the ground. So specifically to your question about metrics, yeah, our scorecard, we look at the land, would include things like how much canopy is there compared to what there should be. And what we do is, you mentioned, well, it's region specific. That's right. You can't compare a farm in one ecoregion to a farm in another ecoregion that has different geography, geology, physio. So you go by, so we use in the US a lot of the Nature Conservancy's level 3 ecoregion maps. And by ecoregion, we'll look at, is there plant canopy? And then what's the insect life and the worm life and all that right at the soil surface? What is there plant litter laying on the ground that's like a mulching litter? Now, is there composting litter going into the ground, like a litter 1 and a litter 2? We'll look at plant species. What are the key species that should be here? But you could have all the right key species, and yet land's desertifying very, very fast. Many range scientists key on species, plant composition, and they'll look and say, oh, there's a Cytox gram over there. That's great. But I'm looking at it saying, okay, that's good. It's a remnant plant, but they should be on the whole ranch. And the water cycle's really poor here. The mineral cycle's really poor. There's so much bare ground, we're not capturing sunlight. they're missing all that. We look at wind erosion, water erosion, percent bare ground. It's all key. There's about 15 main characteristics there. There's some others I'm not thinking of right offhand, but you could find them. They're in our website somewhere.
And is that something that when someone transitions or approaches you and says, hey, I want to be part of the Savory Network, do you think are they doing that because they want to do good for the earth? Are they doing that because there's a value add for them financially? Could there be both?
It's both. It's both. We had two kinds of monitoring we had for years, for decades. We call it a basic and a comprehensive, but they were for the managers, and the managers to go on the land and see is it improving, so they could then say, why not? What tools am I using? What's my degree of brittleness? And what do I have to change to make the change happen I'm wanting? And have I mapped out what I want the landscape to be in the future? The EOV, this ecological outcome verification, this was designed more to bring in academics, the public, and to connect with them. They're really keyed on the lagging indicators, the soil carbon, the water infiltration.
Yeah.
Those things come, but they're lagging, they're not leading. And it was to bring them a higher price point. We could tie markets, companies out there looking for land that's being regenerated, or products coming from land that's regenerated. And they have the consumer and the producers looking for who to sell it to. So our land to market program is putting those together, taking the farms that have a regenerating EOV score and and then the farmer can go do his retailing on his own like normal, or they can help put together some of the buyers and sellers at a larger scale, like 200,000 acres came on board just in the last year in Australia that all went to we're proving the land's regenerating. Therefore, the leather from the animals off that UGG boots did a whole run of that kind of a boot, and that was a way to connect. So sometimes producers say, "Yeah, I want to be in here because I want to improve the land." Other times, we're catching them through the back door, saying, you can get a better price for your product if you start to regenerate. Let's do the monitoring. And then they realize they're not regenerating. Then we move into the holistic management training. So come in the other way.
Love it. Thank you.
I have a question about, I guess, the financial aspects of it too. I'm not sure if this was like said or touched upon before, but does Savory work with, I feel like carbon credits are becoming very popular now. Do you do any work with carbon credits, or do you think that you'll work with companies in the future somehow?
We've done some. Tricia, there's a couple of companies we've worked with where they have said we are into the, like with many of these big power generation plants projects, like a whole big say a new wind powered project, they'll be looking for some nature-based solutions also. And we've worked with them with helping communities underneath the wind power raise their land better to have the land regenerating, not just be generating power off the wind. And sometimes there's carbon credits in all of that. It's all a beginning industry still. We are really looking to, and our land and market folks can speak to this better than me, but I'll try a little bit. There's a whole molecule there. It isn't just biodiversity loss. It's effective rainfall. It's the whole ecosystem processes, the plant and animal communities, the whole thing being there, and all of that should be regenerating and could be traded as credits. But if not, it should make the land more productive for the producer, which should make for greater income there.
Yeah, I guess I should have been more specific. I feel like sometimes I say carbon credits, but I mean like carbon storage more. Like now it's pretty popular that like I use a Cogia on my computer, so like every time I do a search, it'll plant a tree. Do you think that the grazing fields could benefit from something like that? Like every search could be like some wildflowers like planted, or do you think there's like an equivalent like that?
I don't know of an equivalent like that right now for grassland. I know that several things come to mind as you say that. Um, if a wildflower comes up, that's good. But if you had a bunch of wildflowers come up, but the rest of the land is the plant density is still low, and there's a lot of bare ground, so water cycle's not effective, energy flow is not effective, then that's not regeneration. You got more wildflowers. You really need to have the whole ecosystem be improving. Um, yeah, there was another point. It'll come back to me. Something you said spurred me to think of something.
I have a question. Apologies for missing the beginning, daylight savings time, throw
Yeah.
off my calendar invite. Um, I had a question, Byron, not sure if you already mentioned this, but obviously you've had such a great career and you've seen so much and have a connection to the land. I'm curious, looking back, kind of like as we all work on our individual regenerative projects, like what are some of the main principles that you've learned from working with the land that maybe we can learn from?
Well, I think one of the main principles is, and maybe I'll turn it all back to you. What do you think the cause of climate change is, or the cause of desertification? What's the cause? Because there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of things to fix it that are not working, and it's partly because we don't have the cause figured out.
Uh, So I think the ecosystem's imbalance in general, but from my conversations with AI, it seems that automotives and pollution is actually the leading, and emissions is like the leading cause for the imbalance.
So if I argued with you and said, well, I don't think that's the cause, what would it be then? What would cause those to be out of balance? You're right. I
Uh,
mean, yeah, if those things are making it out of balance, what's happened with those things that's making those happen, that's making it out of balance?
that we're doing things that benefit us but damage the environment. Like
Yeah, we are. We are. So what's causing that?
we're disconnected from the land.
It could be, could be. It comes down
Yeah.
to it comes down to management. It's us and our making decisions that's the cause. We can't convince somebody to stop burning fires to get rid of plant material that can't decay on its own, thinking we're solving that. It's up to us. We're saying the cause is we're burning too many fossil fuels, or with ag production, we're the ones deciding that you've got so much bare land 2/3 of the year in our farm fields that's putting carbon into the air. So you got fires going up, pollution from fossil fuel burning going up, ag production letting carbon going up, and we can go do things to stop those things, but why can't we get it done? It comes back to the management. We're thinking in a reductionist way. We're looking at one thing at a time. And this is complex when we're dealing with these soft sciences. And typically we need to learn to manage complexity. And what that really means is, do you have the right people at the table? Do they know what they want, the quality of life? Do they understand how the environment works and the results of these tools? Therefore, when they go choose all these actions everybody's doing, you should be able to see right away, well, this one will get us there or this one won't, or what the unintended consequences might be. And then even then when you choose an action, you have a feedback loop. You follow up and say, is this happening the way we want it to? Is it causing what we want, producing the results we want? What are the earliest signs of that? It really comes back to us and our thinking. And it gets messed up, these actions we choose and policies that put out by, a family maybe has rules in their family, that's policy, but a government has policies. These are all just actions. Those actions aren't really thought through in a broad, what we call not just context, but a holistic context. So it makes sure it looks at people, money, and land to help make the better choices. That's the real cause of desertification to us. It's not, there's lots of things being tried out there, but they're not being done in the right way or at the right time. And I can tie that. Well, first of all, what do you think of that? No or yes or?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure other people agree as well.
So it's,
Yeah.
we argue, what do we argue more about that? Actions or real quality of life values? It's specific actions. You know, if we really get down to what we want, quality of life without actions, we can agree on things. And then we can go talk about, well, the actions, you know, I want to do this or I want to do that. An example, like I worked with the Forest Service here in Western Colorado one time. They were redoing their travel plan. What their travel plan is how do all the different people who want to use the forest, when and where do they go? You know, the bird watchers, the four-wheelers, the fishermen, the hikers, the skiers, the hunters. How do they all use that forest land? So the Forest Service worked for 2 years gathering input from all these user groups and put together this big binder that gave, you know, 5 plans of how to use it. And everybody didn't like any of them. And they were all in the discussion about just actions. Well, we took that 1-inch thick binder and I just went through it and I pulled out all the things that were actions and put them in one list, and all the things that were more quality of life values, put them in another. And then we got the groups together and we basically said, you don't really realize it, but you all agree on this. You all want a good experience as an individual or a family or with friends. And to make it as short as possible, you're going to do it these different ways. That's what you're arguing about, but you all want the same thing. Now you guys go get together and figure out how you're going to do that. And when they could agree, and most people with common sense don't need counseling, they can move forward. They took those 5 plans, and in the next few hours that night, they threw 3 of them out, and they took the other 2, and they were working among themselves to solve what the Forest Service had been trying to solve. So, you know, they were talking at the action level, and they need to know what that bigger context first, and then figure out how to get there. Simple example, but was pretty powerful to me at the time.
Sorry, I
That's
had
good.
a
Thank you for sharing.
You bet.
I wanted to ask because you were saying like action comes first and then the quality of life follows.
That's the problem,
And
right? That's the
oh,
problem. It should be
okay.
the other way around.
Okay, good. I was thinking like I think people need to connect with the why and then okay.
Yeah.
And I also not least like her second question, I was thinking about that, so I'm so glad you asked about like the people that come to the Savory Institute. But then I was also interested in I think you mentioned, I just want to make sure I heard right, that there is like a monitoring system set. So when these hubs get set up, is there like someone that's in charge of those hubs that makes sure that there is progress happening, I guess, or if there's anything like that at all
Yes.
in terms of the land?
The main training we do that the hubs do is training in the core of holistic management. Training includes the whole understanding the environment, the foundations of how it works, the decision-making piece, and then it includes financial planning, planned grazing, and then infrastructure to support that, and then the ecological monitoring piece. And then they work in their own areas with small or large farmers or ranchers or land managers or land trusts. You know, they're good at setting aside land but don't know how to manage it yet. And work with all that as they can in their area. I don't know if that answers it but the ecological monitoring piece is built in there.
Okay, I understand now. I think I understand that you guys are providing the holistic management education, what they do with it. I was wondering if, I
We're
guess,
providing
like,
training. We're providing
yeah,
training and a process. We can't make anybody do anything. So we mostly wait for people to reach out to us, and then we support them best they can. And holistic management is helping bring the process to you for you to say, this is what I want. Well, therefore, what's the best way to get there? And usually it includes a functioning, healthy environment, and we know what works and doesn't there. But to just come in with a bunch of practices and say, do this, this, and this, and then we monitor if they do, that to us is a short-term answer. Doesn't long-term isn't going to really solve it.
okay, thank you.
One of you had a question ahead of time. I'm not sure which it was. saying that Kyle passed along a couple questions
Yes, it was
through
Kim.
me. Okay.
Kim,
Yeah, Kim, you had the first question was, our website talks about large scale grassland regeneration. We do some, Savory Institute itself takes on some large projects that our regional hubs can't handle. If they're smaller projects, we let the regional hubs handle them. So we have work at the big level. It can take years and multi-million-dollar projects. Or we have our hubs taking on smaller ones. But part of your question was, can we get tell me if I'm right here, can we get greenhouse gas emissions under control, fast enough in a way that will help? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. We look at it a little broader than that. Even if you stopped all greenhouse gas emissions today from burning of fossil fuels, what are you doing with all the plants around the world that are oxidizing, that are putting carbon up in the air instead of down? And that reminds me of the other thing I was going to answer back to Trisha's question. Pastures, what can sequester more carbon, a forest or a grassland?
Grassland.
Grassland.
Certainly as much as the forest. And we forget that. We think it's all about planting trees. And so when you go to Saudi Arabia and you desalinate salt water to irrigate trees and plant trees in the desert, I mean, it's just not going to work in the first place. You're doing the wrong thing in the wrong ecoregion. That needs to come back to grassland first. But the other thing about grasslands, it sequesters all that carbon underground, where trees sequester it all above ground, and eventually they'll fall over. And if they're in a regular rainfall area, they may rot into the ground. But if they're in a seasonal rainfall area, it'll just oxidize back into the air. Not that it's still good to have trees, but still to understand the difference. But the key is to stop biodiversity loss, because if we stopped all greenhouse gas emissions, well, what are we doing with the bare ground that agriculture is creating? What are we doing with the fire that's oxidizing so much plant material and putting it right back up into the air? Are we getting bare ground covered? Really, stopping biodiversity loss is the key to stopping desertification. And that comes back to the proper use of those tools, which comes back to proper management of the land. And so the focus just needs to be broader, I would say. Not that we ignore greenhouse gas emissions, but that's not enough to do it. So what can I do at the soil surface level is where, I can recycle and I can do other things, but me in my career, what can I do as a land manager? I need to manage the soil surface that I manage, that I'm in charge of. You had a different question, second one kind of on what are limiting factors for growth and expansion? Is funding it? I would say no. Yeah, we're short on funding to do big projects, but why? Because there's not the thinking that we need to move to more of a whole management picture. Reductionist thinking is driving the funding deployment. So if there's a lack of funding, it's not necessarily funding that's the problem. It's the decisions that are made on how the funding's put out there, because there's lots of dollars right now available, but it's many times being used on projects that really aren't truly going to regenerate. And that ties to one other thing just with finances I thought I'd mention to you. We talk about regeneration and we usually think about the land. It's got to be the people too, and their lives. Can't ruin their lives and their quality of life. And then it also has the economy, a regenerating economy. When we think about spending dollars, that funding on something, where is the dollar coming from? Is its source a paper dollar, a mineral dollar, or a solar dollar? So briefly, a mineral dollar is like if we go mine something, it's a finite resource, but it may be a lot of it, maybe centuries left, but it's, gold, silver, coal, oil. I mean, these are mineral dollars. Solar dollars are kind of infinite. That's from photosynthesis. Is this money coming from a source that captured the sunlight and turned it into a product and generated a solar dollar. And those of us in agriculture, that's what we're doing. We're generating wealth through solar dollars. Paper dollars is the other one. And they're not totally bad. We all trade in paper dollars every day, but they're not backed by the mineral dollar anymore, gold. And when we print more, then there's more, so they're all worth less. That's simple inflation. And so when we solve problems of the land, just thinking about with paper dollars we printed that we didn't generate from the land, we're not using the right source of wealth to, and maybe not even using it on an answer that will produce solar dollars, which would be maybe a short-term answer. But true wealth in dollars, regenerative, really, and Alan Savory's made the comment, the only wealth that can truly sustain a civilization is wealth generated from solar dollars. And we're living on paper dollars right now, which is only our, we're at the risk of our confidence in them is what they're worth and how much it's printed. So solar dollars is where we really ground ourselves, not just environmentally, but on the economic side, and then therefore the social welfare side. So something to keep in mind.
Byron, thank you so much for that. I hadn't heard the solar dollar that breakdown at all. That's really cool. Yeah, very interesting to hear that.
And there's a mix of all, Kyle. We do use all. They all have, they're all relevant at times. But one of the questions. See, when we make choices like we talked about, do we have the right people at the table for this decision and all those things I mentioned? So we make that decision. But in making that, we think through, there's a few questions that, we just do intuitively, but there's some we don't that have kind of stood the test of time. Are we really dealing with the cause or the effect? And if we're not getting to the cause, if there's a problem, if we're not getting to the cause of it, then it's a short-term answer. And one of the other questions is, what is the source of wealth here? Is it a solar dollar? Is it one that's going to be used over and over and over and require it, like killing weeds or fertilization? Those are not long-term answers. Others are related to sustainability and our feeling about it and gut feel and or what money should be spent first. There's some financial ones. But anyway, we call those our context check questions. Isaiah.
Yes, I wanted to know what the most successful regenerative project you've seen is and what made it so successful.
Well, I think at this point, it's individuals on the land, usually families that have gotten their finances back in control, gotten the land to start to improve, and therefore have a happier social life. Everything's going better. Humans at that level are being successful. They're especially on the ranching end of agriculture, the covered perennial with livestock versus the cropping monocultures. That's harder. I don't think you can truly crop regeneratively without livestock in the mix and cover crops in the mix. But human level, we've had many successes of that, just individual families around the world. The tougher part is when we want to do things by scale, all of a sudden we have to have an organization or an institution do it. And those wicked problems of institutions is that they lose their humanity. Individuals within an institution are good, but when the institution gets together and makes choices, they don't think about what's best or unintended consequences. And that's the hard piece to do. And how do we, if you could pull all the individuals out of an institution and as individuals have them say, well, this is what I would do, and then take that back to the institutional level, that would be good. But maybe we'd get some better choices. So that's you asked about what's worked well. That's also where the challenges are on the other end at scale. We're hitting a lot of topics and broad topics, and I don't expect you to have a full understanding of holistic management or of all the things, but hopefully it's an interesting discussion.
It is.
Yeah, as you speak, it's the years of experience and definitely like the in-person on the ground, so it makes it like really interesting because we're just getting the tiny nugget of all the experiences, and it just does make a difference when you're actually out there and speaking to the people and all the different actors involved. So it's very cool.
I'm sorry to ask so many questions. I could ask you questions all day, Byron,
Well,
really.
it's better than me just talking at you all, because this way we're and giving you things that are relevant to you, not just things I think are relevant.
Totally. So my regenerative project for the Soil Centric Ambassador Program is gonna be I want to start like a farm or nursery on an acre of land that I own. And I definitely want it to be regenerative. So this is like a super beginner question, but I'm curious, like, if you had a plot of land, like, what are some of the primary things you would do to make sure that it's a regenerative farm? Like, where would you start?
Well, my thoughts go to where might you be wanting to end. No matter what you're growing on that soil, you want that soil to be becoming better. You know, the soil texture, the sand, silt, and clay mixture, you've got what you got wherever you bought it or leased it. But the structure, are you building soil structure there where it can breathe and let air and water into it? So you're going to be able to grow better plants, whether it's a garden, market garden, or whether it's a pasture, or whether it would even be a mix of crops. So what can I do to do that? Well, there's lots of information out there. Permaculture's got a whole lot of good stuff on how to manage land. They don't have it. They need to strengthen their financial planning and their decision making to go along with that. But as far as some of the actual natural things on the ground to do, there's a lot of good answers out there. There are many small organic gardens that are certified organic that are degenerating the land because their water cycle is becoming less effective, their mineral cycle, their soils, and then the lagging indicators, the water infiltration, the carbon sequestration, those numbers are going negative too. So it's all in the not just the practices, but the management and what you're doing, whether it's a market garden or any other enterprise on the ground. What are you doing to the ecological processes? Where is that located, if you don't mind me asking?
It's in Puerto Rico.
Okay. I'm trying to think if we had any resources or people in holistic management nearby you. We've got a guy who lives in Colombia who lives in Miami who manages the Colombian hub, and he's going back and forth a lot.
That'd be
He
great.
might be somebody who would relate to your ecoregion pretty good.
Yeah. And when I think about like monitoring the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the soil health, I guess it's daunting because I'm like, do I need an environmental engineer to come in and
No,
evaluate these things? Like,
no.
what are some ways we can do it?
These are things managers are taught, because most people managing the land around the world are not going to be high academic people. And it's probably good because they're so far down the reductionist road, they have a hard time backing up and looking at the whole picture anyway. We take their information, but then we apply it to us when and where it fits. No, learning to read the land, the ecosystem processes on your own place. Our procedures are pretty simple, and we usually check the land once a year to see how it's trending.
I think one of my favorite things that you've said that I'm going to really sit with is managing complexity, because it is at the core of where I think we're kind of going wrong as a society. And when I hear you talk about when my question even about the metrics is to simplify, and you can't simplify any single sector of what you're talking about, but you can slow down, as you were just saying to Isaiah, to look at what is happening on each small piece of land. I wonder if it's probably on the website, a way to speak to that, to increase general population awareness about complexity without overwhelming them?
That's right there, an example of managing complexity. How do I talk to my neighbor about the whole concept? We can overwhelm them versus an elevator speech and try to figure out what they need to hear now and what they need to hear later. I mean, right there is, how do we convince people it's not as simple as, I'll hold my phone up here, this iPhone is not complex. It is, we would call in words, we can use the two words complicated and complex, but the point is there's two different concepts. I would call this phone very complicated. You know, but it but if it breaks, it'll stop. It'll sit there. It can't reorganize and keep going. You know, we've done some pretty good phones. We put men on the moon, but we can't manage our own watersheds, our own catchments. You know, what we're trying to manage with people, land, and nature, it's not rocket science. It's harder because it is complexity we're managing. It's not complicatedness.
Well, and I feel like so much of it's taken for granted, frankly, that it's not really broken because I can still go to Safeway and buy iceberg lettuce in a plastic package. So how
Right,
can it really be
right.
that broken? Where
And-
I think we're
and-
all on the inside circle here to know how that's so broken, but
Yeah. And what's the tool that everybody thinks will fix everything? It's not
AI.
fire, it's technology, which
Yeah.
that's where AI fits. It's not rest, leave it alone. It's not using living animals. You know, Alan's talk says cows will save the planet, or Julie Schwartz's book. Well, in those seasonal rainfall areas, you can't stop desertification with fire, technology, or rest, doing nothing. You can only stop it with the ruminant and the predator, which was what nature had there.
Yeah.
Now, in areas like England or Virginia, you cannot use living animals, organisms. You can use rest and it'll come back for biodiversity. But if you want to hold a pasture from going to a timber, well, then you use hay equipment or living organisms, you know, managing cattle or sheep on there to maintain the level of succession that you want. It's a little off from what you said, but yeah, it's managing complexity is the problem. It is not you know, it's not the coal burning that's the problem. It's not the burning of in higher rainfall areas that can't decay. Western Kansas and half of Africa is on fire every year. It's irregular rainfall, but it gets enough rain. It's not short like where I live. It's a tall grass prairie, but it's very seasonal. So they burn off the extra grass. Well, that's a practice that isn't addressing the need. It used to be animals that grazed that.
Yeah.
Not that animals is always the solution, but it's a big one that's totally out of the toolbox and should be in the toolbox. But the real problem is the thinking and how do we do that? That's exactly right. And that's what we're all wrestling with. And so you could do that, you know. How do you bring a lot of people on board so that then they support that and vote for that? Or you go the other way, say, find a country where there's a what do you call it, a benevolent dictator who's kind of kind, but he's still going to say we're all doing this, so you can make the pool of decision makers smaller. Well, you know, that hasn't happened either. And there you might save the environment, but at what cost to the economy and the people's lives? So this is our challenge of our day.
Well, I love the way that you broke it out too between the quality of values and the actions, because I think so often in solution orientation, we jump to action. Like, what can I do that's tractionable right now? And I'm just really going to sit with it. That's not necessary. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah. You know, if my son says, I don't want to go to college and I'm arguing with him, I want you to go to college, we're in the action level.
Yeah.
Okay. If we can back off and say, okay, we both want you to keep learning to have the most opportunities, you know, however we define that. And we agree, then we can have a better conversation instead of arguing about, well, is it college? Is it vocational school? Is it internship? Is it travel the world? And it's no different between ranchers or environmentalists or between urban and rural or between just the ideas that are thrown out at higher government policy levels. What is the action? What's it going to do on the environment with these missing environmental understanding? But truly, where's it going to take us? And then we have serious problems at the higher levels of what are the true motives of the institutions or the government. And, you know, some people are clear on that and some are not. Some are clear on where they want to go. It's not where we want to go. But if we could just know where we are in that framework and that thinking to sort through it to help manage complexity, that's what the holistic management decision-making framework does. It doesn't give the answers, it gives a framework to help you and your decision makers figure it out for you. And one question it asks in there, so that it doesn't come across as selfish, it says, how do I have to behave to have the support of those around me that I need their support? And we ask it that way because the other way to ask it is saying, what do you have to do to support me? Well, you can't tell others what to do, So we have to flip that and say, how do I have to act or my company act to have the support of those I need? And that turns it that it's not a, not a selfish thing. So you got a smattering of hopefully very short on my background, but mostly more on questions and around holistic management and what it is or where we're trying to go.
Well, I have to say, I had a question earlier, but you kind of indirectly or directly answered it by kind of the story about, if you're talking to your son about wanting to go to college or you want him to go to college. My thought was, how do you use this kind of managing complexity philosophy at kind of, on a day-to-day basis of kind of making your own personal decisions. And it sounds like, based on one of the things you were just mentioning, was just like figuring out what, what outcomes you want to have, or what values you're holding, and then figuring out kind of what actions get you to those places versus trying to pick the actions before holding the or coming up with the values. But yeah, I was wondering, do you have any more examples of that?
Well, I think we all do this to some level intuitively. As an individual, we know what we want and we try to choose actions that take us there. But when things get more complex, they say if you want to really accomplish something, be able to write about it or speak about it real clearly, because then it's not just rattling around in your head. You've got it sorted out enough, you might actually accomplish it. Well, when you're dealing with people and the land and money, the way we write it down is we actually help people say, who are the decision makers here? Who are people they draw on that maybe aren't decision makers? And then all those decision makers, what is it they want? What are their values? And that can't list any actions in there. And how do we have to behave? That's what we call, we got the right people at the table and what do they want? And then we can start filtering actions toward that. And thinking back through some of those context checks I was mentioning, like specifically, like I could have, I'm a whole, right? W with a W. I'm a whole being, a whole, but my wife and I are a different whole, and so together, what do we want? Or if that flops over into our farm too, when we're related to a farm, who are the decision makers there, and what does that whole want? That's how you try to be able to sort through it. I don't know if that begins to answer it at all, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the holes within holes within holes kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that's what it is. Holes within
Yeah.
holes. I'm trying not to use that terminology, but then when we write a textbook, when Alan writes it down and his wife Jody says, no, that doesn't make sense, and they're trying, you end up with terminology, but it's the concept behind it that's the real key.
I have a related question, Byron. You were talking about some of the success stories that you've seen have been on individual farms and ranches because that whole is discrete. And then when you get up into the institutional level, then the individuals are lost. What do you think, or where do co-ops fit in that model? Is that in between individual groups of farms and ranches and an institution, or is it in parallel to an institution? Because someone we were talking to recently was very keen on co-ops, and I'm just wondering if that is relevant here.
Well, I don't know the answer exactly. I know our Australian hub has reformed and made its business structure entity legal-wise. It is a co-op. So a co-op could be either way, I think. I mean, in this case, the co-op has much more individual input, much more sense of ownership by the owners. And so therefore, I would say it is work functioning more. Now, a really large co-op that has shareholders and boards of directors and is nationwide might start to become more of that institution, which is harder to deal with. And yet that's what we have to figure out how to deal with, because that's how we'll scale the fastest.
Thank you.
Well, all of you have project you're working on to start thinking about regeneration. I would just suggest keep in mind not just the land, but the people have to be able to have what works for them, and then the money works for them in a regenerative way, so that therefore they can take care of the land. How
Yeah. Oh, go
how
ahead.
long? I was just going to say, what's our time deadline? How long do we go here?
We've got about 7 minutes left,
Okay.
but it seems like the questions have died down just a bit. Unless are there any other questions that folks have? Isaiah, I know you look you look pretty geeked for another one, but yeah, do you have a short one?
Uh, no, it's okay. This has been amazing. This has been
Okay,
amazing. Thank you. I learned a lot.
I think I kind of have a short one.
go for it.
I feel like, well, obviously the whole thing is land management. So I'm curious, do you think there's a big difference between managing and coexisting? Or do you think they're the same thing?
I don't know. I see humans as part of the environment. I don't see us as separate from the environment. We are here. We've always been here. At least we're here now. So I'm not going back to where we're not here. Um, but I don't know. It depends maybe how you define them, Tricia. If managing is thought of as overbearing and versus it being nicer and more in harmony to coexist, I don't know if that's where the question's coming from, but it should have good results for the environment and all the creatures there and humans together. To me, that would be where I'd say my values are coming from. I think we can be working to improve. I don't think it has to be, it's kind of like with land. I don't think sustainability is where we need to be. There's a lot of land in poor shape that we shouldn't be sustaining. We can actually regenerate it, which is the new buzzword now, regeneration. I don't know what the next one will be, but the truth is, whatever we call it, are we really improving the land as we use it? I don't think it's a thing of, well, we just use it easy or less, and then everything will be fine. Um, you know, livestock they're not easy on the land. Buffalo aren't easy. I mean, I go move we got 220 head of buffalo. I go move them yesterday, and they're rolling on the prairie dog holes, tearing up ground, or they're breaking things over, or elephants in Africa, they're knocking trees over. It's not a matter of ground isn't fragile. It needs to be actually stimulated to grow. And that's, I think, same thing in the bigger picture.
I have a quick question, kind of along the same lines of coexisting and partnership. When you are instigating or setting up a regional hub for somebody, do you work in partnership with other agencies, government, nonprofit? Is there an ecosystem of support that way for the work that you do? Or do the managers really work one-on-one with the land proprietor and that's it?
No, it's both, but it's really driven by them.
Mm.
Our hub in Norway does an awful lot with the ag departments in Norway. They have good connections with them, and they really are tied to them. We're here in the United States. The range scientists, have still never accepted some of Alan's work because it questions their thinking and their careers, and so it's very hard for them to change. It's different everywhere, but it's really driven by those regional hubs and who they want to work with. We have one, just an example, our Arizona hub started by a civil engineer. He's spending his whole life putting in dams and helping control water that's coming from ineffective water cycles running off and flooding cities in Arizona. And he realized, I'm dealing with the effect. Now he's still got that business going, but he's at the same time trying to build a business helping the landowners in a lot of federal government land, a lot of state government land, realize how to manage their land better to stop the flow of water coming off the land so it's more effective, so that he doesn't have to keep building bigger concrete structures. Now, that's a whole different aspect. And in his case, he's dealing with a lot of government agencies when he's just doing his work. Just people put out bids and he goes to bid on it, but his bid's a little different.
Yeah, for some reason, I suspect that's a lot of blocking rather than partnership, but
I don't know. I'm not sure on that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to say, Byron, thank you so much for coming in today and talking with us. This was seriously eye-opening and truly inspiring. And I think we could keep going with questions for a long time. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming and spending time with us today.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed it and appreciate all of your interest in this whole topic and what we're trying to solve here. For
Thank you,
sure.
Byron. I think it'll really help inform the projects over the next couple of months, especially thinking about some of these questions, having them front of mind. So thanks so much for jumping in.
You betcha. You betcha. Sorry I had to broadcast from my basement, but our grandkids are here overnight tonight, and this is the quiet spot.
Oh, great.
Well,
Thank
good.
you,
That's the
Byron.
Good to
This has
meet you
been
all.
That's the
amazing.
context.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye
Thank you.
now.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right.